I'm just going to do a brief slideshow presentation of kind of the major, the what, the why, the how of conducting evaluations in ProjectFirma. And then we'll get into a little bit of an interactive demo live in the application. And after that, I think we have some time reserved to respond to your questions. So that's what things will look like. And this is the John Day for those of you who are interested. Beautiful. Okay. So Damon mentioned who I am, but my name is Mike Jolliffe. We have a lot of Mikes here at Sitka, so I go by Jolly. And I'm a product owner, so I do a lot of interaction and going between the development team and the client, making sure that we're building what people want and is useful. So I'm familiar with the prioritization process since that's part of my kind of day-to-day job. And on the team I'm on, we're called Hawkmoth, and we kind of work in 4 code bases or 4 applications primarily. ProjectFirma, which is what we're talking about today, but we also do a lot of work in Pisces Web, which is cbfish.org. We do some work for the Washington Department of Natural Resources in their forest health tracker. And we also work in an application called Monitoring Resources, which is all about collecting, designing plans for collecting monitoring data. Okay, so let's get into the what of conducting evaluations of projects and or proposals. What is an evaluation? So, you know, my kind of definition of an evaluation is it's a systematic point in time review of specific projects or proposals with respect to predefined criteria. So just to kind of use a silly, simple example, let's say I've collected a bucket of rocks and I put some water in the bucket. The bucket represents an evaluation. You fill that bucket with a number of projects. So those are the rocks. And then you have some sort of criteria. In this case, we'll say the water represents the criteria we're using to measure the projects. And we want to know which ones are submerged, right? That's the criteria, if the rock is more or less submerged. So if it's fully submerged, it gets a certain rating. If it's partially submerged, it gets another rating. If it's not at all submerged, it gets a different rating than the other two. So sort of a way of prioritizing the level of submergence of a stone. That's kind of what we're doing. The why. So I have lifted some language from a couple of project descriptions. And if I were in charge of kind of doling out money to implementers who are proposing projects or project sponsors who are looking to get work on the ground, and I only had these descriptions to deal with, the prioritization, it would be really tough. So let's take a look at these. Project A, we're proposing to restore habitat for spring-summer Chinook salmon, steelhead, and bull trout within a 2-mile reach of Big River, which is just a river I kind of made up. The project would reestablish natural river floodplain connections and processes. It would include multiple channel networks created through forcing mechanisms of large wood, ice, beaver, and rock. Okay, sounds like a good project. Project B, this project will add complexity to the Little River where additional juvenile rearing is needed. It's a large-scale restoration project that includes multiple actions on tributary creeks, such as Feeder Creek, Little River, the main stem Little River, and then Big Tree Creek. Additionally, there's other kind of work that's being coordinated alongside of it where partners have applied for a grant to look at sort of the impacts of sedimentation, temperature, and E. coli mitigation as a result of that work. So there's some cool monitoring data that could come out of that as well. Some of the described complexity work would include large wood additions, channel narrowing, and pile-assisted willow weave structures. Which one's better? And not only which one is better, but how do you transparently articulate to everyone else involved in the process, all of the stakeholders, sort of why it's better. And that's what gets us kind of to this evaluation mechanism. So it's really meant to achieve a couple of things in my mind. First is it supports your decision-making process. And because this application has multiple tenants in it, and the prioritization process for each tenant looks potentially very different, we have built this initially, what we're going to look at today, very flexibly. So you can use it in a number of different ways to achieve sort of what you're trying to achieve. Now, because it's so flexible, there are some limitations as far as how far it will get you if you have like this beautiful goal of, you know, it's tied into the rest of the application. And that is stuff we can talk about that might be cool future enhancement work. And we'll take a look at some of the enhancement work we have planned at the end of the presentation here, just to give you a flavor for the sort of things that Sitka has seen might be useful, or that people have actually recommended and we have captured, but we haven't started working on yet. So from a decision support perspective, there are a number of ways you could use this. You could use it up front. So you have a case where there are more projects or proposals than funding available to fund them. So it's really, where do we draw the line of these projects get funded, those projects don't. That's one way you can use it, is kind of upfront as the gatekeeper of good work. Another way is kind of in the middle. So you have in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end is what we're walking through here. And in the middle, you have some in-flight projects. They're in implementation. Maybe you finished year one. And what you really want to know is, okay, we're trying to adaptively manage our program. The limitation here maybe isn't funding so much, since the funding has been allocated, but it's the resources of our staff to make sure that everything is moving along smoothly. And so you can create a portfolio of projects to evaluate for which ones really need adaptive management. And you can establish some criteria for, yes, these need our attention to make sure that everything moves smoothly for the remainder of the implementation phase. And then finally, you can do kind of a retrospective of projects. You can build a portfolio of projects that have been completed that year or whatever the period is, and you can look at them. So let's pull together all maybe access projects. So we've removed culverts, replaced culverts, that sort of thing, for additional habitat channel access. What were the best and worst projects? You know, let's get together and vote on those, and why, and let's really do some learning to feed back into future proposals. You know, which projects should we really do a deep dive on and take lessons learned away from, that sort of thing. Secondly, transparency. So transparency can, you know, this evaluation process creates an agreed upon external rubric and a review process that can build trust and understanding between the funder and the person receiving funding, between all of the stakeholder partners that might be involved, various agencies, the public, that sort of thing. If they're understanding, you know, why certain projects got implemented, how they rated, what was important, what are the key features that are relevant for funding projects, you know, how do those fit in? Like, how are we looking at projects with respect to long-term goals or a vision that we have for what we're trying to accomplish at the watershed scale or at that larger temporal scale. So it can achieve that for you, in addition to giving you increased clarity. So those are a couple of the main takeaways for maybe why you would want an in-system evaluation process. So the where, in ProjectFirma, we have implemented the project evaluations as a tenant configuration option. So it could be on or off for your particular tenant instance. If it's off, just reach out to us and we can turn it on for you. And then once it's on, any administrator in the system, so one of your administrators of the application, can build project evaluations, define criteria by which you want to evaluate the projects, and then load particular projects into those evaluations. All right, so the when, we're going to look at it now. Everything that you guys will be seeing is currently out it's available in the production instances of the application. So if you're not seeing it, it might just be turned off, and just reach out to us if you want it turned on. Okay, let me jump over to the application. So we're going to be taking a look at Reclamation, their instance of ProjectFirma today, and the way you would, this is the way you would turn on or off the evaluations. So one of us, like myself or another Sitka administrator, would come into the tenant configuration, and there's a little switch that we can turn on or off that is enable project evaluations. So Reclamations is turned on, and then if you go into manage, you'll see project evaluations right there. So let's take a look at that. Right now, there's only one evaluation that's been created. It's called Proposal Review 2020. And I'll just jump in there real quick. So each evaluation is going to have a basic section, an evaluation criteria section, and then an evaluation portfolio section. So what is this evaluation about? How are projects within this evaluation being evaluated in the evaluation criteria? And then in the evaluation portfolio, what projects are being evaluated? So let's go back out here. The evaluation can be given a definition. So what are we trying to accomplish with this evaluation? We're trying to review and rank proposals for approval in FY20. The evaluation has a kind of a current status. It's in progress, and we'll take a look at what that means more in a minute. You can give it a start and end date. Those don't really drive anything right now, but they're nice placeholders for potential down the road functionality, just to auto-populate proposals potentially. If you have a cyclical review process that you're involved in, that sort of stuff can be really helpful for just, it can maybe automatically insert projects that meet certain conditions, but we haven't implemented that yet. The evaluation criteria, so it will just list out the name of the each particular criterion that you have defined. And then the evaluation visibility, which is really who has access to this information. So we'll unpack all of that right now. You can create a new evaluation kind of with this button in the upper right here. Clicking on that, you'll see pretty much what you saw in the columns. So you give it a name, you give it a definition, you give it a status, etc. So we'll just create a simple one for now. And I think you're probably familiar, but these lightning bolts mean the field is required. So you have to provide information. Something interesting about the way we've built evaluations is if you choose the status of draft, so this is just, very early on, we've got a sketchy idea of what this evaluation may entail. You're not required to provide a start date or end date if you see how those disappeared there. So let's say they're required for some of the statuses. In draft, they're not required, so you don't need to provide that information. Additionally, the visibility, you can choose an evaluation that's visible only to you. So you can use this for your own day-to-day work if you're trying to prioritize projects in a way that's only relevant to you. Maybe particular folks, implementers you want to check in with, or projects that you want to prioritize according to some criteria. You can make it so that it's visible only to you. You can make it so that it's visible only to admins within your organization, or you can make it visible to all admins within your instance. So those are some of the high-level things. Now on this status, something else to mention. If you create a draft or a planned evaluation, because they're not in progress yet, they're kind of they're upcoming, or they're going to start at some point in the future, you can't actually conduct the evaluation. Now, if it's in progress or it's completed, you can modify the information about that evaluation. Completed is really meant to just kind of capture, for posterity's sake, the decisions and the rationales around ranking and funding that have been made. So the system will just persist the evaluations in case you want to revisit them in the future. Okay.
Jolly.
Uh-huh.
We have a question actually. Carrie wants to know, could we set up another user type called Evaluators to grant broader access to a specific groups of people?
Yes, actually, we will take a look at, we have that story written up. That is one of the things that we're excited to potentially work on. So when we get a little bit later in the presentation, we can discuss that story more, but I think that's a great idea. And I'll actually show you specifically why that functionality might be good or might be necessary. There are a couple of workarounds that, for at least one piece of it, there are a couple of workarounds you can use right now. But as far as getting people who are not administrators permission to review, yes, that right now only administrators can be involved in the evaluation process. And so there's definitely a need for maybe, we've talked about what's called an access control list. So an administrator could define particular users and roles in the system that would be able to evaluate a project. So that is on the horizon for us. Okay, so let's take a look in our evaluation here again. So we have our basic section, which describes just the purpose and general details of the evaluation itself. And then our evaluation criteria. This is what we're going to use to actually rank or assess, evaluate the projects that we fill into this portfolio down here. So right now I've got two kind of stubbed in, and there are a number of ways of defining or handling criteria. Some of the ways you could do it, you could have a ranking process where each criteria represents a different dimension. So for example, maybe biological would be one. What's the quality of this from a biological perspective? Number two could be logistical, right? So this one kind of hints at that, this site access criteria. How easy is it for us to actually get in there and do the work? It may be a slam dunk from a biological perspective and from a financial perspective. You know, it's really strong project, but maybe there's some issue with site access that makes it infeasible to potentially, or very difficult to do the work. You know, maybe there's not enough space to stage our equipment, or there's no real road access in, and so you'd have to kind of build a road, or you'd have to modify the landscape in order to actually get to the site. Maybe it's really far away from anywhere, and so there are other logistical concerns with staff travel all the way out there, et cetera. So that's one way. Each dimension represents sort of a particular facet of what you're considering, you know, financial, logistical, biological, even political or visual, right? Like, does it get a lot of face time with the public? Is it something that, you know, cars on the highway are driving by and they can see the good restoration work that we're implementing, something like that. Another way you can use this is each criteria could actually represent a person. So for example, we can create a new one here, and I'll show you. We'll say Jolly's opinion, right? And maybe there's a bunch of these for each voter, and you can start to do sort of a Delphi method approach where, you know, you can do rounds of opinions where Jolly gives his opinion, another stakeholder with maybe slightly different interests in the project and sort of what's important to them would give a different answer, and you can aggregate those in a way that can work. And you'll notice right now I'm adding numbers to the rating. And I think this is a pretty important point to make, because if you want to evaluate projects with more than one criteria, at some point, typically, it seems like you want to arrive at a final answer, one number, one ranking to rule them all, right? And if they're not numerical ratings, there's really not an easy, if they're just narrative descriptions, you know, I make this say very important or something instead of a 1. There's no easy way to then use like a sum or an average to really come up with a final number. Okay, so we've got Jolly's opinion here, and we could add more. You can see that there's a definition. There are a certain number of criteria. And now we can add projects. There are kind of 2 main ways to add projects. The first one is you can add projects according to the taxonomy. So each instance will have a different taxonomy. In this case, Reclamation's taxonomy would be, okay, we want to look at habitat projects, and maybe we want to look at them in a particular geography. We'll say the Grand Ronde. And we're really only interested in, say, screens. And I only want proposals, something like that. We add those, and then we'll see there are 2 that are proposals ready for review. You can also add projects individually if you want. So you just type in the name of the project and you can add it that way. So we'll add these 2. And then the way you evaluate them, you'll see there are these 3 criteria we've established up here: basin ranking, site access, and then Jolly's opinion. They correspond to columns that get created in this grid. So basin ranking is the first one. It's the first column here. Site access is the second, and so forth. So you just come in and you would edit one of these projects, and you'll see there are the 3 criteria. And I'm going to say, you know, high, maybe it's a really good priority reach and it's important to the ESU. Medium, site access, and then maybe I don't consider this project very important, or I consider it very important, whatever it might be. So you come through and you rank those. And we'll do maybe one more here. And then what you can do is, okay, you've got these different columns of numbers. If you download them, you can very quickly, in Excel, which I think most people are familiar with, come up with like overall score, right? And you can say, you know, equals the sum of those 3 potentially. And now what you're looking at is an aggregate or a composite of various dimensions. And you can see that, assuming they're equally weighted, right? There's no weighting applied to any of these dimensions. The Beeler Ranch, this Lemhi project, would be considered maybe superior. And so we should make sure that really this one gets funded first, and then, you know, we march on down the line. Yeah, so that's how that works. I think that about covers it. Let's see.
Jolly.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question here. Can
Sure.
multiple people be evaluating using the same evaluation at the same time?
If I understand correctly what is being asked here, yes. The one wrinkle is the criteria. You would have to recreate the criteria for each person. So let's say for person number 2, who's also going to be evaluating, we would have to, there's no way for us to copy across from Jolly's opinion, right? So that's another potential improvement for the future. But yes, once this is set up, each person can be in the app at the same time, and you can be evaluating, and it will really, it'll be your column. Now that said, someone else can modify your column. We have not restricted the columns, and so I could potentially come in here and say, well, even though I'm not person number 2, I'm going to say their opinion, you know, is it's a very important project. So like I said, it's pretty lightweight and flexible right now. We haven't done a lot of sort of locking down of functionality or anything like that so far. But I'll show you a few things that we've got potentially on the horizon. So the one I mentioned already, but we do have some stuff coming up. So for those of you who aren't familiar with software development, we basically track units of work as stories or features that we will implement. And what you're looking at here is a number of different stories. So this one, define project evaluation criteria as an admin. So we just looked at that, how you can do that as an admin. It's been accepted. So anything that says accepted is work we've completed. And the stuff that's in analysis, I think, is what's more interesting for you guys. This is stuff that, you know, we've taken a look at or we've gotten feedback from users on previously, and we're working it up to the point where it'll be ready for development. You know, we're getting it specified appropriately. We're finding budget to move it through the development lifecycle, and then it would be out in the system. So here's one of them is the ability to evaluate many projects at once. So a bulk edit functionality. Rather than, you know, if I add 20 projects to my evaluation, I have to go through by hand, one by one, and edit them. And maybe you want to edit them in bulk. So that's one enhancement that is potentially on the horizon, depending on appetite. Another one is what we kind of hinted at previously, the ability for an administrator to assign groups of projects to be evaluated by specific evaluators. That, together with this bottom one down here, allow other users to evaluate projects. As an administrator, you'd basically be able to say, okay, I'm going to define a group of people who can evaluate the project, and then I'm going to assign them to a group of projects. So that's a way that you can kind of delegate out the ranking or prioritization process. And this might be something like, I know with a lot of reclamation projects or reclamation and Bonneville Power funded projects, there's this sort of local planning process that happens in order to prioritize things. And this can really kind of help support that, getting information from those maybe paper or PDF documents into the system so that you can track the priorities within the system. And so you could create your local you know, technical review team group or whatever, and they would provide an evaluation of the projects. And then finally, because we would be having multiple people evaluating a single project, maybe even on according to multiple criteria, we would want a way to allow entry of an overall evaluation value for each criterion. So if you have 10 people evaluating a project according to its biological benefit, let's say, high, you know, you get a high, a medium, a high, a low, a medium. What does that mean? What does that ultimately resolve to as a single number? And so we would want to support that. So those are some of the things that are on the horizon. And this functionality, I would say, is pretty new for ProjectFirma. We implemented sort of the last bit of it that you guys saw in February, near the middle or end of February. And so I don't know that it's been stress tested heavily yet. And so that would be great if folks could get in there, play around, stress test it. Let us know, don't hesitate to give us feedback on what's working, what isn't, how could future enhancements such as these and others really support the way you like to work in the application and the way you like to conduct sort of your evaluation process. Okay, well, thank you everyone for taking the time to go through this training. Here's my information, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions. I think Damon is capturing a lot of questions, and don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have anything else or you have comments or feature requests. Yeah.
Well, we do actually have some questions in queue, Jolly,
Cool.
if you have some time here.
I do, yes.
The first one here is sometimes we ask multiple evaluators to rate a project on multiple different criteria. It looks like there isn't a way to do that currently. Example, we want Mary experts to rank a given project on shovel ready, applicable to vital sign and importance.
Yeah, so that sort of ranking cube, if you want to call it that, where you have multiple evaluators evaluating a single project according to multiple criteria, that is not something that is handled very well at all right now. But the stories that I was mentioning, I do believe would get us there. So you can have, you know, you can establish a group of people who will review a story, and that can include Mary expert as well as others. They would then review a particular project or a set of projects according to many criteria. And so, you know, per project, you would have multiple evaluators, multiple criteria, which results in multiple scores. So, you know, this project X would have, for the, I forget the particular shovel ready. For shovel ready, it would have maybe a 1, a 2, a 2, a 3. We would have some way to both see that disaggregated evaluation, right? So you can see what each person voted or ranked for each criterion on each project. But in addition, you would have some way of aggregating those up to like a grand total or a composite score, rather than having to ship that out to Excel and do pivots or any other work outside of the system. So there'd be an overall shovel ready rank for project X. Did that answer the question?
I think so. I think we do actually have a related question just regarding the timeline for
Mm-hmm.
supporting multiple evaluators. Do you have anything you could add regarding that?
I do not. I think Matt Deniston, who's the product owner, the product manager, sorry, for ProjectFirma, I think he probably has a much better bead on the timeline for that. That said, our development teams have been doing quite a bit more work recently in ProjectFirma on a lot of these sort of mainline features that are beneficial to everyone, and that's both Sitka funded. So Sitka has been kind of doubling down, investing in ProjectFirma with some exciting stuff, but also a lot of client funded stuff. And so I would just have to check with him on. Most of them are in analysis right now, which would lead me to believe that we still need to get funding secured. But once that funding is secured, I expect it would be in the system in pretty short order. I don't think, excuse me, I don't think any of those are particularly heavy lifts. Any other
Yeah,
questions?
Matt did. We do have other questions. Matt did confirm that there's no timeline right now, but we need to find a funding source for additional project evaluation features. So he kind of confirmed what you said there.
Cool.
And then we have another question here. This one's from John. He wants to know, are there ways to weight the criteria? For example, some criteria will have a higher importance.
I would say there's no easy way, because the weighting of criteria, especially if we're talking about like composite scoring, since we don't composite score, there's actually no kind of multiplication happening. The way you could do that is, let me jump back into the app real quick. And this is me just shooting from the hip, but potentially the way you could do that is you would have, you'd have something like site access weight, right? And you give it a weight of maybe 0.5. And then once you export that sort of thing out of the system and into Excel, you can then apply formulas against the weight column and the value column. And so it's a little bit of a kind of hacky solution. I think what you're asking for, John, is a really good request, because ultimately, like we saw with when I exported to Excel, maybe, you know, you want to rely the sort of the visual or political aspect may be, you know, way less important than the biological benefit or the logistical challenges. Maybe the logistical challenges can make or break a project, and so you really want to weight those heavily. If there's site access and staging issues, then you don't even know that you're going to be able to do the work, that sort of thing. So you could create a criteria that basically rides along, called weight, and then that might be a potential way to do it. I can play with this more and follow up with you though, John, see if that's a workable solution.
Yeah, Puget Sound also agrees that weighting would be very, very helpful.
Okay,
Coming
good.
there. So I have another question here is, would you recommend or discourage a summative criteria that is the overall rating in your example? This came in earlier when you were doing the demo, so
Mm-hmm.
you might have to think back. But in other words, make the overall rating more transparent within the system.
Yeah, I mean, so that is also an excellent point. I'm glad I've got experts here. The overall score may not be something you want to do outside of the system, and that is why one of the stories we have is all about kind of coming up with that overall score. One thing you could do to bring it back into the system once you've done all of the math out here, and if you want to use averages or you want to use even fancier formulas, you want to do some sort of multiple rounds of feedback from users outside of the system, you can do all of that, and then when you come back into the system, you would just create an overall rank criteria, right? And that's really what you would use to drive it, and that would just reflect what you had turned off or kind of decided on offline. So the overall score would be 4, you give it rank 1, and the overall rank is what you're really looking at that in that particular project, if that makes sense. And like I said, we have implemented this to kind of meet a really broad range of needs. And as folks get in there and use it and can provide feedback and can help kind of co-discover with us how you want this to work, I think we can really tailor it so that a lot of these workarounds, a lot of the moving it out to Excel for further analysis, I think we can capture that in the system.
All right, thank you. We do have one more question in queue, which I'll ask, but before I do so, I just want to let the attendees know that we are recording today's web training. I will be sharing that with everyone following in a day or two with links to the recording. We will also be adding it to the training page that will be rolled out to the different instances so others can use this. I do think that there's a lot of good feedback, and I could imagine that this new feature could be a great topic point or discussion point at our ProjectFirma user group happening in September. But we do have another one here. This is a question for you, Jolly. In the future, it would be great to evaluate projects against their contribution to performance measures. Could project managers or PMs someday be used to pre-populate criteria?
Pre-populate, I was following until the pre-populate criteria thing. I think it is really interesting if you have planned values for performance measures to have those drive the ranking process, where you're maybe not even manually ranking yourself. The project is ranked for you based on other information available in the system. I can also see that being useful from like a cost efficiency perspective, right? So if you have a proposed budget for a project and then you have some performance measure total, you can get a cost efficiency value that says, you know, we're getting dollars per linear foot of riparian or something. And so you can look at a project and from a financial perspective, get a pretty good feel for, you know, is there an economy of scale? Maybe we want to be doing projects that are really large contiguous things because the economy of scale there is, you know, we're down to, you know, $3 a linear foot as composed to like $50 a linear foot, something like that. So I think that's a really good thing to be thinking about, and that could be really cool future functionality for sure.
Okay, if there's any additional questions, I don't have any in queue. So with that, I guess what we will do is we will end today's web training. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Jolly, for taking the time to share this information.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if there is, I think, you know, probably just revisit it. If there is anyone who would like to add project evaluations, get it turned on, we'd love to, you know, do reach out to us and we can add it to your instance and go from there.
Cool. Thanks, Damien. Thank you so much, everyone.